Hello. Yeah, it's good to see you. And this is our first video in looking at the last third of our course. And obviously now it's all going to be online. Obviously the whole world has changed. Reality, since only 3 weeks ago, wasn't it, that we had a class on a Thursday, didn't we? And the whole world has changed since then. So it's obviously a fascinating time to be alive, but it's also a little bit of a scary and tragic time. So really try and look after yourself, look after your loved ones, and obviously that's the most important thing. And I'm going to try my best to really help you get through all this. And basically we've got 4 more topics to do. And we've also got to think how we're going to do the class presentations. I'm going to be doing discussions with some of you sort of about how we can do that. And now really what it is with the 4 topics we've got be the same. There'll be a backpack thing, due every Tuesday at midnight. A backpack, remember 1 question and 2 answers. There'll be homework just as normal that you can upload. I'm giving space on Learn for you to upload. And at some point we'll sort of do an exam. But ultimately, the basis of the teaching will be the slides that will be up online, and I will do 2 videos explaining the slides each week, and hopefully, and also I have my online office hours at 5 o'clock each night on Zoom. So just I'll send another email out about those today, and just feel free to just Zoom in, talk, whatever you need to talk about. At the end of the day, I recognize you're all under a lot of pressure, and so I'm going to try anything I can to make this semester work for you guys. Okay, so we are looking at the whole money and banking system. So these videos, I'm going to upload the slides so we can look at the slides. So you'll see more of the slides than you'll see of me, which is good. So here we are. So it's this. I'm going to share the screen with you. Any feedback that you can give me on these videos, I would really appreciate. This is obviously new for me as well. So together, we're going to get through the rest of this semester. Okay, so this week we're talking about, it's a bit of a change. We're sort of moving away from the aggregate demand, aggregate supply to, the whole question of first, we're going to look at banks, money, and the credit market. Next week, we're going to look at more the Federal Reserve and the whole monetary system. After that, we'll be looking at, some special topics that are close to my heart. First, the economics of the environment, and then we're going to finish off with economic inequality. How do we measure that? And, what can be sort of done about it in that sense? We asked the big question, is it better off, are you better off being in the US and in Canada? That's, that's going to be in a few weeks' time, and that's an exciting one. The answer is probably not what you think, in monetary terms, that is. Okay, so, but this week it's all about banks, money, and the credit market. And obviously we have seen some sort of, a crisis. I've been around an awful lot. I've lived in many, many different countries. But the crisis, this corona virus crisis, is something that I've never seen before in my life, something that has brought such a global slowdown. But if you notice, there are certain things that are still running very well. The health system, though it's overwhelmed, is operating very well, especially in the US. And also the food system. Obviously there has been some panic buying, and sometimes it's been difficult to get certain things. But generally, the whole supply chains and the ability to produce, grow, transport and bring to market food is holding up very, very well. Yeah, our local Smiths over in Yale, it's just amazing. They're really just serving the community brilliantly, coming into work. They're you know, they've got sanitizers out. They're cleaning everything all the time. You know, you feel very, very safe there. It's very, very good. But what also is bearing up very well is the financial system. You know, and you know, if you remember, right at the beginning of the crisis, there was a big injection of money to the financial system. The Fed was lending all sorts of money at a very, very low rate to banks. And, you know, you had all these people on Facebook and Twitter saying, why are they giving money to banks and stuff like that? And you know, part of the reason is that, you know, you need to keep, you know, as you know, I'm not so, you know, I'm not so much of a right winger. I'm not so much of a free market person. I like to stand with the poor man or the poor woman on the street. But, you know, ultimately, you know, the banking system is very, very important. And if that collapses, you know, everything collapses. You know, if you went down to Smith's or to Walmart or to your local grocers with some dollars or a credit card, and they say, sorry, we're not taking that, you know, unless you can bring some gold or, you know, some item of value, we're not giving you anything. You know, you would know that things were really, really bad if things had got to that point, because we have a banking system and a money system that is very strong, very powerful. You know, money is still, for many of you, going into your accounts, you know, and, you know, maybe that there's others of you where it isn't, and that's not good. But, you know, generally, you know, checks are being paid. You know, people are accepting your money. People are accepting credit cards. You know, the whole system is still working, and it's a very, very powerful system. And we're going to look at how it works today. You know, what I'll do, I'll try and keep it like normal. I'll try and release a video on Tuesday. It will be like the Tuesday class, and a video on Thursday that will be like the Thursday class, just to keep a sense of normality. You know, obviously you can look at these videos whenever you want, so it's not such a big issue. Okay, so there it says, money is one of mankind's most important inventions. And you think, well, you know, oh, why are you getting into money? You know, come on, there's more to life than money. But you realize money is a very, very important thing, you know? And so, you know, ultimately, what is it? What is this stuff that we're spending all the time, that people live their whole lives trying to get and accrue, you know? You know, ultimately, money is an asset that people are willing to accept in exchange for goods and services or for payments of debts, you know? You know, so it's an asset. It's something that is valued, and you know, it's a very, very powerful thing when you actually think about it. You know, you know, when, you know, probably you don't actually think about it. You just think, oh, here is $20. You know, that has a value if you go into a shop. That has a value that you go into a place, and it's quite interesting. When we're in the US, so obviously money is money's all over. But when we talk about the US dollar, it has value. For example, you know, when we talked about, I remember I've talked to you stories about Dubai and the money laundering that sort of built that city. You know, and often it was, you know, people from the ex-Soviet states who had made lots of money through all sorts of devious means, were taking and you know, laundering that money in Dubai. What was that money that they were laundering? Was it some sort of Russian rubles? Was it English pounds? No, it was dollars. Dollars have international value all over the world. There's very, very serious reasons for that. But I find in some very obscure places in Africa, I can pay in dollars. Everyone knows the value of a dollar. And that's, you know, not only is money a very powerful thing, but the US dollar has become a very, very powerful thing. They always used to say that, you know, when in the Afghan sort of wars, you know, the Mujahideen that were fighting the Russians, this was in the 80s, would go and, you know, sort of, you know, buy arms, you know, sell often sort of drugs and heroin for arms, but it was all done in dollars. It was all done in dollars. Dollars are a universal currency, and we're going to look at why that is sort of later on. So money is a fascinating thing. Even if you're not like, oh, I've got to have money, I live for money, money is everything. Even if you're not that type of person, just analyzing how things work, how the money system works and how it influences things is very, very interesting. Often, you know, we look at politics and we look at all sorts of things that are going on in the world, and we think, oh, it's happening for this reason or it's happening for that reason. But often at base, most things that are happening are to do with money. That's why we get up in the morning. That's why we go to college. That's why we do all sorts of things, you know. And it's good to analyze. It's good to understand, you know, what is it? Where does it come from? What purpose does it have in our lives? So, okay, let's go back to this sort of hypothetical situation where Smith's was not taking money anymore. And say if you wanted some milk and some eggs, you might, you know, have to give a chicken or something, you know, because obviously for them then to have some eggs, that, you know, that they have to have a chicken out there, and it would be a system what would be called sort of barter. And obviously before the invention of money, people used to barter. You'd go to the market with a sheep, and you may get like 2 chickens for a sheep, or you would get you know, a certain amount of wheat for a sheep, and that's what the whole system was all about. It was about barter. But if you think about it, it's not it's not a very, very efficient system, because, you know, if you go down and you say you want a couple of chickens and you've got this sheep, you've got to assume that there is somebody with 2 chickens who wants a sheep. You know, you need this thing called a double coincidence of wants. So it becomes very, very inefficient. And, you know, say in this world, you know, you wanted an iPhone or something like that. What would you swap it for? You know, and if you happen to have someone else had something of value that you wanted that seemed to look like about the same value as an iPhone, maybe you'd be able to barter. Otherwise, it would be very, very complicated. So something had to come along to sort of stop this. And the first thing that came along was this idea of commodity money. Commodity money is some sort of good, something that has some sort of intrinsic value, independent value, and it could be used as money, you know. Over the years, like animal skins has been used like that, you know, precious metals have been used like that. And so this idea of commodity money made things a lot more efficient. Say if you had like gold pieces or silver pieces, they would have a particular value. You say, okay, each chicken is worth a certain amount, each sheep is worth a certain amount, each like a bushel of wheat is worth a certain amount of silver or gold. And that's how commodity money works. You know, sometimes they always say in prisons that like cigarettes or tobacco becomes like a commodity. Everything is valued based on tobacco. It looked as though a few weeks ago the whole idea of toilet roll would become like this commodity money. You know, that's the only thing that would have value, because that's what everyone had run out of. But, you know, thankfully the supply chains have sort of worked out, you know. So you had this thing called commodity money. And what was it doing? Imagine these gold pieces or these special shells, I think they used in China at one time, or these particular animal skins that, you know, were seen as money. What were the functions? What was it actually achieving? And it was achieving three things. So money really has three functions. One, it's a medium of exchange. It's people will use it to exchange goods and services, and that's the sort of thing, you know, when you go into the shop and you're buying things off your friends or things, that, you know, that's what money is, you know. But it's also a store of value. Maybe you haven't got much money in the bank, maybe you have. Obviously, rich people, why they're rich is because they have all this store of value. And maybe they could see, oh, my store of value is a house, or is this, but it's ultimately, you know, the big store of value is going to be money stashed away. And, you know, so it's because you have that store of value there, you can use it as a medium of exchange in the future. You can think, okay, if I've got $1 million in a bank, you know, I could be using that to buy things in 30 years' time, you know, something like that. So it's a store of value, but it's also a unit of account. You know, ultimately money allows us to put a value on goods and services. You know, is there, you know, obviously there's a whole debate about, is there an intrinsic value to, say, a chicken? But no, we've seen that through supply and demand, that the market gives a certain price, an equilibrium price to any particular good. And that is always defined as a monetary price. And so, you know, it is a unit of account. You know, your labor can be accounted. You know, the amount that people are going to pay you for an hour of your labor can be put in monetary terms. Any particular service, a haircut, you know, a waiter serving you things, you know, a teacher, whatever, can be given some sort of value based on what they're going to be paid, you know. And this is all, you know, functions of money. This is what money gives us, the flexibility money gives us. And so, yeah, so we've had all this commodity money over time. And it's often been about something that has some intrinsic value outside of its role as money. So often that's been sort of precious metals, that's been shells in China, cigarettes in prisons and prisoners of war camps. You know, in colonial North America, it was all about animal pelts and skins, because that was the thing that had intrinsic value, and so you could sort of tie everything else to those, to their value in those things, and that's commodity money. But, you know, obviously, what's the problem? I wish I could ask you questions and get things back, but, you know, what is the problem with that commodity money fundamentally? You know, really, would you like to go down to Smith's with, like, you know, 20, you know, rabbit furs, or, you know, a whole box of shells? You know, it becomes a little bit unwieldy over time. And so over time, the idea of this fiat money, it's an idea that came from Italy, I think in about the 15th, or no, maybe 14th, 15th century. Oh, no, it actually says it began in China in the 10th century. That's, I'm wrong there. But yeah, so the actually original idea came from China in the 10th century, but it became, I suppose, came into Europe, or became sort of widely more popular through, you know, Italy. So you know, the word fiat is an Italian word. So, you know, they basically said, well, you know, if we're all part of the same legal system, we understand each other, you know, why don't we, instead of bringing all these shells or, you know, gold pieces around, why don't we, you know, get a bank or a government to issue some paper that we trust as money? And so ultimately, it's you know, that whole idea became stronger and stronger. And in modern times, the idea of a central bank creating money that people trusted came into being. You know, at one time, you used to be able to exchange that money. You used to be able to exchange a dollar or an English pound for a certain amount of gold. There used to be a gold standard behind it, so it was a mixture of fiat money and commodity money. But nowadays, now that a lot of modern economies have come off the gold standard, it means that it's pure fiat money. You know, the dollar in your pocket is just, you know, basically has as much value as people believe it to have value. That's a very, very important point that we'll go into more and more especially over sort of next week. And so it's, you know, it's very, very interesting to think that, you know, yeah, what is this stuff that we put so much value to it? And later on, I'm talking about the dollar in your pocket, the physical dollar. But we'll show you in a couple of slides that that's only a very, very small part of the dollars that are around, you know? And so, you know, we trust this stuff so much. And, you know, it's ultimately we're trusting in what created it. Do we trust the Bank of England? Do we trust the US Federal Reserve? Obviously, some central banks create money that people don't trust. And we'll look at that a little bit next week when we look at inflation. But up to now, in the US, you trust the dollar, but and we'll see that the whole world trusts the dollar, but that may change in the future. So the whole idea, the whole revolution that is fiat money has obviously advantages and disadvantages. It allows as we'll see, it allows the central bank to create money, to expand and to contract the money supply. It allows for, you know, a lot of credit, allows for, you know, flexibility in the money supply, which we'll look at more on Thursday and next week. And, you know, probably some of the great prosperity of the late 20th century has been through the ability for the Federal Reserve to create and expand the money supply. And you know, so there's a lot of advantages to fiat money, but there's also some disadvantages. It does create a problem that it only actually works as long as people have confidence in the system. And we've known in places like Zimbabwe, in Venezuela, in Germany in the 20s, when people stop having confidence in government money, it creates a terrible, terrible situation. You know, hyperinflation, you know, the breakdown of the monetary system, and, you know, something sort of very, very negative in the long run. We're not there yet, and you know, hopefully we'll never get there. So let's, you know, we've talked about the concept of money, and it's, what is it? You know, what is it generically all over the world? But let's zero down into the United States. I think, like, how do we count money? You know, how much is there of it? Who's got it? Where is it? You know, let's look at questions like that. And there's a couple of ways to define money, or the money supply. So we could call it the M1. That's the narrow definition of the money supply. It's a sum of currency in circulation. So it's the physical money that is held, the checking account deposits in banks, and, you know, the holding of travelers' checks. People don't really have travelers' checks so much anymore, but they used to. It used to be a big thing when I was younger. But you think, oh, that's money, isn't it? But you realise that's not really. It's not probably much M1 about. You know, what is really the big thing is money that's just a number on some computer bank account, or a number in some, you know, market deposit account, you know, something like that. And so M2 is that broader definition of money. That's the money that's just registered on computers. It's where the very, very rich have their money, because they're not, you know, if you've got $10 billion in your bank account, you're not getting that out and, you know, counting all your physical dollars, are you? It's all there. It's all on a computer ultimately, isn't it? And so that M2 is a much broader definition of money, you know? And so just have a guess to yourself, how much of money, physical money, or, you know, readily accessible money in a checking account, how much of a percentage of the money supply do you think that is? Just think through that question, and I'll give you the answer. So there is basically $3.5 trillion dollars that is in M1. So basically there's $1.4 trillion that is physical currency. So what you're saying, so in June 2017, what this is saying is that there were $1.5 trillion of physical dollars in the world. Now, if you then take checking accounts, you've probably got $2 trillion in checking accounts, sort of accessible money that people have. Now, but if you actually look at how many dollars there are, in the sense of dollars that are there on a bank balance sheet, or, you know, people possess them, but are not in any way in a physical form, you're talking about $13.5 trillion. So, you know, the actual physical currency is about 1/10 of the actual amount of physical dollars, or, yeah, you know, is about 1/10, sorry, of the amount of actual dollars there are. But these dollars are just numbers on paper. You know, yeah, you know, theoretically, a rich person like, I don't know, who do we talk about? Warren Buffett could get his $80 billion out of everywhere he has it and get it into physical dollars and hide them in his cellar. But he's not going to do that, is he? You know, probably, you know, 99.9% of his wealth is on some computer somewhere. And so it's very important to understand that idea. Now, when we say, you know, and I don't know if you're right, but, you know, sort of M1 is about 1/4 of M2. And obviously physical dollars are about 1/10 of the amount of actual dollars there are, you know, in circulation. And actually I will say that physical dollars are, you know, normally that's a lot more than a lot of other countries. And the reason being is obviously a lot of, you know, dollars are used all over the world. The physical dollar is actually currency in probably every country in the world. You know, you could probably get away with using it. You might have to convince certain people, you know, in certain places, but, you know, the dollar is a very, very, very powerful currency. And because of that reason, you know, there's probably a lot more physical dollars, you know, as a percentage than there are, say, physical UK pounds or euros or you know, the sort of the, you know, Japanese yen or Mexican pesos, things like that. Normally, the actual currency is a very small amount of the actual the wider money supply. So when we talk about money, what do we use? So, you know, ultimately, because we're talking about a medium of exchange and going down to Smith's and being able to buy things and stuff like that, you know, we're talking about M1. M1, it seems to be the better definition of money to use. And so that's good. You know, it's good. You know, sort of. You know, that's in terms of like the daily wear and tear of the economy. You know, obviously M1 is very, very important, but especially in a few weeks when we talk about inequality and the wider question of inequality, that really comes into M2, because obviously if you've got vast amounts of money in a hedge fund or some sort of money market balance, or you know, something that is just accruing more and more money upon itself, that is the root of lots of inequality in this world. So M2 becomes more important when we look at other things, but for the moment we're really looking at M1, which is really, forget about the traveller checks because they're not really that important, but it's really the physical currency plus what you've got in your checking account. And that's where we can look at the role of banks, because banks are very, very interesting things. You know, I grew up thinking banking was very boring. I lived through the banking revolution of the 90s and 2000s, and where I saw that banks were totally transformed in terms of what they did. So let's have a look at what do banks do. Now, I don't know about you, but I used to watch a lot of Western movies, and I used to always imagine a bank was this place with lots of, you know, people, you know, the cowboys would go and descend on a town and they would rob the bank and it would be full of money and they would take that money, you know. But the more I look at it, I realize that a bank doesn't want to have lots of money. In fact, the bank that has, you know, sort of all its money inside its vault is not actually being a very good bank, and they're certainly not making much money, you know. And banks make money, and they actually also create money, and it's all quite an interesting process. And what I'll do is I will leave that there, because if you look on this slide, you know, there's a YouTube video on how banks create money, because I think we're getting to our half an hour. So what I'll do is I will allow you to watch that YouTube video yourself and to think about what it's saying, and then we'll carry on Thursday, and we'll start sort of looking at what are the implications of this, because banks basically create money, you know, and they create it through giving out loans and through fractional reserve banking and all these sort of wonderful ideas that we'll, you know, try and watch Mr. Clifford's video, and then on Thursday we'll go over the major points of it, and we'll make sure that you understand sort of everything that's going on. Okay, so well, I hope you enjoyed that video. That's our first attempt at a sort of video. Remember, I'm on office hours tonight at 5 o'clock on Zoom, and I'll send you an email explaining everything. Okay, see you on Thursday.